There was a big meeting that happened this week between the G20. These are the top 20 nations in the world. It happened over in India, and they created something called the New Delhi Agreement. And that's a big deal because the top 20 nations have all basically agreed to this. Now, I say the top 20 nations, except for China and Russia decided not to go. It's a pretty big deal. Covered this before, so I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about this, but I think it's pretty important to see that you have the top 20 nations, except for 2 of the top 5 potentially didn't go. President Xi was there at the BRICS summit, which was not the top 20 nations, it's the lower 20 nations, but he didn't go to the G20. And he basically said, forget you guys, I'm on to my own. I'm doing my own thing. At least that's sort of the narrative that was spun up. But at this G20, it's a big deal because a big chunk of the world, it's the top 20 nations of the world. And they came up with something, like I said, called this New Delhi Agreement. They published their outline. When you read through these, they're a little bit vague and ambiguous. And a lot of times the laws are made to be vague and ambiguous so that they can apply them arbitrarily, or maybe they don't want to directly say exactly what they're for. The problem with that is that they can be applied broadly and arbitrarily. So we don't know exactly what they mean. Now, it could be just like, oh, these are like big dreams that we have, or this could be we have some very covert plans we're not telling you. So we have to sort of use some of our own opinion when we're trying to kind of decide. But let me just tell you what some of these things are. So in this declaration, so that reached consensus, top 20 nations, you have an international commitment to dramatically scale back the use of private lands, private and public lands, restoring by 2030 at least 30% of all degraded ecosystems and scaling up efforts to achieve land degradation neutrally, grow less food, feed less people, allow less people to live. I don't think, is that what they want? They want to scale back the use of private and public lands. What do we use public and private lands for? Well, we use public and private land, sure, to build, I guess, national parks, okay. We also use it to get minerals and resources out of the ground. We use it to get energy out of the ground, oil, gas, things like that. We also use it to grow food. So if we use less land, does that mean we get less energy, we get less food? Potentially. They don't say specifically. If you look at their other agendas, such as like the Sustainable Development Goals, 2030 agendas, and things like that, and you can kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together, and that sort of seems like what it means, at least to me. We saw that they have a commitment to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. We don't know exactly what that means, but it looks like it could mean potentially an end to land development, and also the return of land that's currently occupied back to its natural state. What do we use the land for? Well, for food and for energy and resources. If we don't have that, then how do we continue to feed the world? We saw that they had a plan for international governance of AI. They want to come up with a global, responsible way to use AI, things like that. Is that really what they want? Or do they want to just control technology? Interesting, we don't know. In another document of official policy recommendations titled the G20 Policy Recommendations for Advancing Financial Inclusion and Productivity Gains, the Digital Public Infrastructure, it's a long title. They talked about creating digital IDs. As a matter of fact, digital ID appeared 83 times in the document. Now, they talk about furthering financial inclusion, at least that's what they say, especially in low and middle income countries where insufficient documentation is often a barrier to account ownership. The problem is that with a digital ID, then they could require everyone to have it. The problem with tools is that they make our lives better by making things more efficient and convenient. They're also tools that can be used against us as well. So, for example, in China, everyone has a digital ID. You have to take a facial scan to get access to the internet, and then nobody can post anonymously. You say something mean about the government, something they don't like, they know who you are. So the problem with digital IDs is that they can be used like that. They talked about in the New Delhi Agreement expanding the international tax system. They want to build a publicly regulated and controllable digital public infrastructure to create a global minimum tax. I'm kind of against that. It doesn't really matter to me as an American. No matter where I move for the rest of my life, I pay a federal income tax to the United States, which is above what the minimum tax is. But if you're from another country, like Canada, for example, you can move to other countries that don't have taxes. They want to get rid of that. They don't want that happening. They also want to embed global financial institutions, including banks, with ESG. They want every financial institution, every international institution to ensure all the financial institutions and systems get behind the sustainable practices. Now, we can see that this is not worked out so well in the past. As a matter of fact, Sri Lanka, which was the poster child, had the best ESG score in the world at like 98, fell because of that. One thing that I'm seeing is that while we're certainly seeing the G20 and these people get together, continue to push this ESG narratives, we're starting to see the ESG narratives start to fall apart at the same time. So, for example, many of the Wall Street companies like BlackRock spun up ESG funds. I think they've all pretty much been shut down. In the United States, I think it was like 26 states said that they can, the pensions can no longer invest into any companies that have ESG funds. They started to penalize banks that have ESG narratives. So it's almost like these global elites, like at the G20 and the World Economic Economic Forum have built up this bucket of ESG, but now the bucket's getting a lot of holes, and they're continuing trying to put more in the top of the bucket, but it's leaking out the bottom, and the holes at the bottom are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So I'm hopeful for that. Maybe I'm hopefully optimistic. I'm an optimist. But I think this plan is starting to fall apart, but they're not letting go of it yet. So we're continuing to watch that. It's going to be interesting. They want to pass uniform laws on regulations for cryptocurrencies, which I think is pretty interesting. What's interesting is how did the top 20 nations get together and agree on anything? Just in the United States alone, we can't even agree. In the United States, we can't even get regulations on cryptocurrencies. And this week, we saw Gary Gensler in front of some Congress committees and was just getting completely wrecked. As a matter of fact, they've been calling for his resignation. Now they're trying to pass a resolution that would change the entire organization of the SEC, so we don't even have a chair there like Gary Gensler anymore. And they're telling him this. So this is just in the U.S. We can't even agree, and they're trying to shut this down. How do the top 20 countries agree on this? Pretty interesting. I don't think it's going to work, but this is what's happening in the world. They want to regulate you. The whole world wants to be in on it. They want to take away your land. They want to control your digital ID. They want to control your money.